recording is on. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So today we are currently on week 4 of the semester, and we have lecture today. So as you know, we are currently finishing up with just general JavaScript topics. So today we're going to look a little bit more into object-oriented programming. We're going to continue that discussion, and then after that, as you might expect, we'll do some examples, and then on on Thursday, you guys will work on I will provide maybe a few more hints about the homework assignment, object-oriented programming for the grade calculator. And then at that point, the homework assignment will be assigned. So it will be due a week from Thursday. All right, so hopefully you've started to work on that already. We talked about it, I believe, on Thursday. So you kind of know. So on last week, I went over some slides. I introduced some of the topics, functions, etc. This is the last topic before we move to jQuery. Right, so probably next Tuesday we will begin with jQuery. Okay, so just be aware of that. All right, so today then the plan is to talk a little bit about JavaScript classes and object-oriented, as I said, and then there's a few other things I believe we haven't covered yet. So let's go ahead. Just give me a second here. So last week we covered, we got as far as object literals, I think. Yeah, so let me create a new object. I'm creating a new, you should create a new HTML file, call it JavaScript class .htm.
I'm not sure if you're sharing your screen or not.
So I'm just I'm creating the file, so I'm about to do that. Yeah, so I just open Notepad, so just the same thing I always do, right? So open up Notepad++, and today we'll go over, as I said, just other ways, other examples of things that we can do. I know we've covered object literals, so we went over object literals last week. Just very simple, how to use functions as objects, basically. So we went over that. And then we went over with example. So we did that one as well. Just an example of how to use, again, create some objects. JavaScript is very object-oriented, so everything can really be an object. And then we covered, just created this is what we'll cover today, so let me close that. And then, I closed the wrong one. So, there we are. Okay, so we're ready then now to kind of continue. We still need to do the JSON objects. We still need to do Stringify and all of those examples. So we will do that as well today as time permits. And I think we also need to look at cookies and how that would work. So I'll give you an example of that. this we've already done. Just regular text boxes, for loops, and the drop down. We went over that as well. Zoom in just a bit more. Okay.
Professor Calix,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think there are some people in the waiting room that need to
Are
be
there?
let in class.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, because when I'm sharing, I don't see them anymore. But I don't. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's. Okay, yeah, you're right. Thanks for letting me know.
Yes,
All right,
sir.
we're ready then to get started. So, we've done this. All right, so I think this is where we are. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about then today is, I guess we can talk about ECMA script 2015, which is also known as ES6. And it's basically, think of it as a new guidance of some new syntax words that were added to JavaScript to kind of, because everything like, all programming languages like Python, etc., have the word class, for instance, right? So they have the keyword class. All right, and so that's kind of what, we're going to show an example of that today. Just, basically the way that I would put it is, JavaScript has been present for a long time. And over the years, as you know, programming languages are evolving ecosystems, if you will. And so they do get introduced some new terms every now and then. And in 2015, ECMA script, or ES6, kind of was a guidance that introduced these concepts. Over the years, there's been debate, so people will use this or that. And some people will argue that something is better, something is worse. We're not going to get into those details. Really, jQuery hopefully will abstract some of that for us anyway. But we will just look at some more examples of this, today. So just be aware of that. There, you might come across. However, my understanding is that basically browsers will support both approaches. So kind of the approaches, obviously, that a lot of the code is written on. And then over the years, like in 2016, 2017, the browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, etc., have been supporting more and more of these things. So if there's new ones, like if DuckDuckGo becomes a browser, or something like that, a main browser, I'm sure that that they also develop these things into the. So remember that the browser is really the thing that needs to interpret the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. So the browser is a program. They have to follow specific design frameworks, security frameworks, and also obviously support the programming languages as they evolve. So they have in fact added a few terms. So we'll just add that as part of the tools in our toolbox. So today we're going to do a simple example of object-oriented again, similar to what we did last week. Just this time we're going to take a look at the class name from this new 2015 sort of guidance, and you can decide which one you want to use. I'm not going to get into the details of which one is, which keyword is better. That's not really my goal. I mean, you can make your own choices based on what you prefer. Okay, also the code that we're going to be writing in this class is not going to be so complex that you really have to worry about very subtle things in the JavaScript syntax. So what are JavaScript classes? Basically, JavaScript classes are templates for JavaScript objects. Okay, so it's kind of that's sort of what they created. They still support the basic idea of objects as functions. They just have this new template called a class. So let's take a look at that. So in this case, we're going to use the keyword class. So obviously, we're still going to begin with our basic HTML syntax, right? And our examples don't really change. It's just we're adding more, more keywords or more, more syntax that we have available to create files. All right, so we got the basics here. Obviously, our JavaScript will go in here, which is the focus for us. All right, and then we're going to need some kind of a span or something down here, probably just to kind of display our results. Let's call this one data, maybe. Just name. All right. And I think everyone is in now. All right, so let's proceed then to the essence of today, which is object-oriented. So the basic syntax for this, we use the keyword, the keyword class, as I said, and you can always add a constructor, right? So we have, for instance, in here, class, and then you give it a name. So let's say I'm going to call it car, right? Class car, and then I use the same notation as before. The curly, oops, this should be a curly bracket and close curly bracket. Notice it doesn't have parentheses because it's not a function. And then within here, we can define, various functions. So for instance, I can, I can define the constructor name, and that allows me to initialize car just by calling car with parentheses. So here I can give it, just a name, comma, and then the year of the car, maybe. And then curly bracket, close curly bracket, and that's it. That's pretty much all you have to do. Everything else at this point would be intuitive to you, I would imagine, on how to do this. So in the constructor, of course, we still use the keyword this. Okay, so we're going to use keyword this dot, and then name equal name. So we're passing those parameters as arguments. We can also do this year, right? And then we pass year to it. Okay. So now we have our little constructor there. And so the example creates basically the class name car. And it has two initial parameters, which are name and year. So a JavaScript class, although you don't really have to know this, technically speaking, a JavaScript class is not an object itself. It is a template for JavaScript objects. Okay. But you don't have to worry about that. It'll basically pretty much behave the way that you're used to when you're defining a class. So so now we have that. When we have this template, we can use it to define objects of that class, right? So obviously you're probably thinking, well, I want to define like a car or something along those lines. So let's add a little function here, similar to what we've done before. So I'm just going to add a button maybe, input, and just some generic thing, and then I'm going to type equal button, and you know, value is just going to be, you know, press here maybe, right? And then once you have that, then we can specify the event. So we're going to specify the event. So I'm going to say on click equal, and then I'm going to specify some functions. So here, my function. Right. Specify that. And then now that I have this defined, I have my input, I can define the function. Keep in mind, define the function, outside of the class, right? So not inside, so you're going to do function, my function, and then you do something like that, right? So pretty standard. But now you have both the class and the function in there. So they can go ahead and try to define in here, your function. So here, usually you can do var, var. There's a couple other ones in this ES6 of 2015 description or guidance that you can use now. So there's a few other keywords. Instead of var, you can use something called let, right? And I won't get into the details of it, the difference, basically to say use them interchangeably. If you'd like, you'll see me, during the semester just switching around. But let, the idea is you create a variable. The issue has to do with scoping of how let defines a more specific scope of a value of a variable. So for instance, if you use let in this function and then use that same variable outside and declare it, they're different variables, but with var, they may be the same variable. So it's sort of, you could think of var intuitively as a more global variable. You can think of a variable defined by var as more of a global variable than, say, a variable defined by let. I would say that's probably the simplest way to try to think about the difference between these two. Right, but I'll let you guys play with that and kind of get a feel for it. What you can do is declare variables with let and then use them out, change them, and then see what they are outside, versus when you define variables with var, change them and see what they look outside. Okay, but for most things, we're just going to assume, let is the, or var, right? So in this case, I'm using this one since I'm going over the, as I said, the ES6 or ECMA script guidance that is currently being adopted. So let's take a look at this one. So I'm going to create a variable here, and I'm going to say, what do I want? I want a car, right? So I'm going to say my car1 is going to be equal to new car, right? New car. And you can define whatever car you want, cars that you like, etc. So let's say you define, like a Mazda or something, right? So Mazda, and then you say what year, right? So I'm going to initialize this to, I don't know, 2015, right? So you have a Mazda 2015, you've created the object for it. And then now, that's kind of what's going on there. So now if you wanted to display some information, right? So we learned if we want to display the information, so now it's a Mazda, you want to display it in your span, so what do? You're going to get label message, take the same approach we've been taking all semester. And what do you do here? Document. Right, so you do document dot get, oops, And this get element by ID will start to change soon, but for now, get element by ID. All right. Oops. Get an element by ID. And then what's the ID? The ID is, of course, data, because that's the ID name, right? And then, we take this approach to get our values on here, semicolon. And then over here now, I'm going to do what? I'm going to assign to label message dot inner HTML. And what do I want to assign? I want to assign my car one dot name, right? So I get the name of the car there, and hopefully that will give me what I need. So this is just a quick example of this. So let's try it out. So definitely go ahead and run it on your computer there. So hopefully it'll work. So let me save it. Save it. And if there are no errors, let's see, we should get Mazda. And there you go, Mazda. Oh, sorry, I need to share it. And you can see there, now you should be looking at the website that I just rendered from that. If I refresh and then I click press here, and I get Mazda. Questions?
I don't think so.
Make sense? Pretty easy, right? Pretty easy. It's pretty intuitive. All right, so that kind of is just similar to what we were doing last week, right? Just taking looking at some of the other syntax. So let's go over this. Let's elaborate just a little bit for completion. Now, as far as your homework assignments, feel free to use whichever one you want. Be careful if you're using like an older computer, which I doubt anyone is using such an old computer, but possibility, right? So if you're using an older computer, some of these may not work, especially if you haven't updated the browser, right? So I'll provide what I believe are some of the browser versions that support these keywords. If not, it will only support the other. So we looked at that. Okay. So we looked at using the class. We can create objects. We could create another object. For instance, I can create another one here and just call it my car 2. Oops, my car 2 new car. And let's say you have a fancy car, right? You have a Porsche or something. Is that how you spell it? And then you have a, like an old Porsche, 1965. Oops. All right, so you have, another car there. And now over here, look, you can just change the my car 2, right? So now you have 2, save it. I go to the website. You should be seeing the website now. All right, so I refresh the page, press here, and there you go. It shows the other car. So you can basically create an entire inventory of cars. Now, obviously, what you will be doing for your homework assignment is creating a whole inventory of assignments. I've already given you some ideas, if you remember last week, and I think I provided in Brightspace some examples as well. So in this example, the example shows that it uses the car class to create 2 car objects, basically. So I think, all right. Notepad, so now I'm back in Notepad. Now, if you notice, I left some space blank in here. We're going to add some more to it. So you can see there that the constructor method was called automatically when a new object is created. So you just have to take this approach and then it calls automatically its constructor if you hadn't noticed before. So the constructor method in JavaScript here in this approach, in this guidance, is going to be a special method, okay? Special method. It has to have the exact name constructor in the function. And it'll be executed automatically when you create the new object. And of course, as you know, it's used to initialize your parameters, properties, or the arguments. Okay. Now, the next question you might have, well, I know how to create the constructor. I know how to create the attributes in here. What about methods? Well, you can also create methods, thankfully, right? So you can go over here and just call, call it whatever, right? So you give it a name. So in this example, let's calculate the age of your car, right? So if you notice, I put in intentionally 2 cars, one not so old, one pretty old. So we're going to try to calculate the ages. So basically, you just name your function in here, put in the parentheses, right? And as you might imagine, then you just put in curly bracket, and now you have your method, which you can then easily reference for your own purpose. So in this case, we want to calculate how old the car is going to be, right? So one should be 5 years old, or 6, I don't know, it's 2021. And then the next one will be, how old is that? 34 years old. All right, so we need to do those calculations. So again, we can use, let, for instance, and then I can use date equal. And this example, we'll see some of this again as we look at cookies. We'll go back to the date object, but here I'm introducing it. So I'm going to say I want a variable called date, and it's going to be of type new date, where date is a built-in object of JavaScript, and it just indicates the date, right? So it's got all the parameters of today's date, actually. So then I want to return the number of years. So to do that, I can grab the variable date, right? Notice it's lowercase d, so it's a variable that matches the one I just defined. And then I can call its properties. So in particular here, I can say get full year. Get full year. And now I have the year, hopefully. So I would have 2021. That's really what I should have. And then after that, I subtract that from this object's year, which will be this dot year. There you go. So this dot year, and now I have the difference, right? Now I have the difference. So the key thing is, if I want to use this correctly, is I would go down to this, to my 2 cars here, and I'm going to say, well, let's start with my car 1. I want to print out the age, so I'm going to say age, right? And I just make a call to the function. Notice the use of the parentheses. And hopefully then the inner HTML will have either 5 or 6. So let's go ahead and save it. And then go to the website, refresh the page, and now I'm going to hit, and there you go, 6 years. So that's the first car, because it's from 2015, I think it was. We go to the second car. All we have to do is change this parameter, my car 2. This one should be about 34 years old. So let's try that. refresh the page. 54 years. Oh yeah, 54. I'm thinking 2000, right? Wow. Okay, no, 2020 plus 1. All right, so there you go. So it's 54 years old. Good thing for computers, right? Because otherwise we'd get it wrong. All right, so that's the simple example. Any questions so far?
None for me, at least.
Okay, great. Other things we could do is we could send parameters to a class, obviously. So here we can send a parameter x, for instance, right? Some variable. And then instead of this, what I was saying is now you should be seeing the notepad. I can also send a parameter to the x, so you can see that one there. And so instead of, this, let me just comment it out. And now I'm gonna copy. And we could do x, right? And so we get rid of that. And so now that parameter, we just need to pass it here. So we need to pass some kind of value that we want. So for instance, now it would really, we can try a number like this, but it should probably be a date object. So let's see. That is correct, I think. And 2017 minus 67, yeah, that's 50 years. Wow, half a century. All right, so yeah, it works. You could also, as you might imagine, create this, the date object over here, right, that we had, and pass that as well. But that's just, another example of sending parameters to a class method, which might be of interest to you. All right. So a lot of this is supported after Chrome 14. So these parameters, class, etc., should be supported by versions of Chrome 49 and above, I guess. Firefox 45, Safari 9, Edge 12. Okay. So, and that's, so for now, I think that's sufficient. All right. There's also JSON, of course. That's the thing that we're going to cover now in a little bit more detail. And we're going to cover, if there are no questions on this, we're going to cover JSON, parse, and stringify. Okay. Seems like everyone's very quiet.
I mean, it all makes sense to me.
All right, good. That's great. So,
excuse me, Professor. I did have a question. On line 40, you have it as an input tag, but I don't see where you like finished off the input.
oh, that's a good, I just missed it. All right. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Good catch. Very good catch. So let's just, so the browsers are forgiving, right? But yes, thank you, good catch. All right, so now, since I really there's more object-oriented to cover, however, I just want to make sure I cover all the other topics, and I know I haven't covered the JSON part, and that's also in your homework assignment. So let me move to that, and then we will come back to anything related to object-oriented programming. And then after that, we should be able to do two more complex problems that we will be doing this, either today or on Thursday. Now I've already defined JSON, right? So I don't really need to do that. That's already been covered in the slides, but it's basically it's a format for storing and transporting data. And it can be used when data is sent from a server to a web page, for instance. Okay, so let's go ahead then and take a look at that, the JSON object. All right, so I'm going to create a new file for this. So you should be creating a new file yourself. Call it JSON, example.html. Go ahead and open this in Notepad++. I can close the class, so that one we're saved and we're done with it. Notepad. You should be seeing the Notepad. So let's take a look at just a JSON simple example. This one will be parsing an object. So remember, when parsing an object, you're going to take a JSON structure that is saved as a string, and you're going to convert it into the object itself, right? So we're going to need our HTML, and then we're going to need our head section, and then we're going to need the body. Oops, body section. Okay, and then here, basically our JavaScript first. Okay, so oops. So now the key item here is we're going to use the JSON object. So let's define a function. So we're going to define a simple function. Let's call it, test something. In curly bracket, close curly bracket. And now we're going to define, this is going to be a person string, okay? It's just a variable, person string. And so it's going to be like this. It's a string, basically. But within it, we're going to specify an actual object, right? The way that we did it in the format last week. So within curly brackets, okay, so let's do then the name value pairs. So we can call this first name. And then we can do colon, and then the value is going to be, let's say, John. And then we're going to do comma. Same thing, last name, colon. So this will be something that you're going to play with as some of the problems in the handout require you to do this, right? To save your data in a cookie, I think it says. So that's something else that we will take a look at, is saving it to cookies. But now imagine all we have is the string. This is the string. And now we're going to take this string and convert it into an actual object, basically. So to do that, we're going to create now a variable, let's say, same thing, person, but instead of string, we're going to call it person object. And we call the JSON, sort of, you can think of it as namespace. right? So we use JavaScript built-in function JSON dot parse. So that's the function name. And it's going to take as input, it's going to take as input person string. Okay, so we have that. And once we do that, it's going to convert this that is a string, and now we'll be able to access, you know, if I call person object dot first name, I'll be able to get John. I could, that's something that doesn't work. Here when I do person string dot something, that's not going to work because that's just a regular string, but this one now is an actual object. All right, so we can go ahead then and kind of piece together, you know, same thing as we've been doing. Let's have, you know, some kind of a placeholder here. And we're going to say message. Message there and span. All right, so then we can call this over here. And this one we're just going to call on load, so that will make things easier. So we can do var full name. It's going to be person object dot first. And then we're going to concatenate these two. And we're going to say person object dot last name. All right, so we have that there. We've got the string now. Same thing we've been doing. So send it to label message. So document get element by ID. Semicolon. And now we can send it back to the inner HTML. And just assign it full name. All right. So now just to call this, let's just add a simple onload here. This is going to be test. Okay, so hopefully this should work. So now we'll get John Doe on the screen. So you can go ahead and save it and then open the browser. All right, so share that. And you should be seeing here that it prints out the word John Doe. Okay, so that's parse. I mean, it's simple, so it's not like it's very difficult, right? We just completed that part. Okay. Let's try now. Obviously, if we have parse, then we can now do the opposite of that, which is stringify. We can basically use the same script. So I can just go back to the same one. And now we're going to add the JSON Stringify. So I have the person object, basically, right? So I want to do the opposite now of it. Okay, so I want to do the opposite. So I have to basically convert it to the string. So I'm going to create, let's say new person string. Right? So that's going to be the new one. And it's pretty straightforward. You again call JSON. You do JSON.Stringify. Okay, so that's the plan. All right, so stringify, and we need to specify in here what we want to stringify. So in this case, it should be person object. Okay, so now the question is, we probably want to display this somehow. So let's kind of try this one again. But now this is going to be a string. So let's see what this will look like. Copy that. Oops. Copy that. And when you're doing this for your homework assignment, remember, this string is the thing that you will, I believe the assignment is asking you to save it to a cookie. All right, so you'll have to think about that one. But I will provide an example, a different one of what to do there. So let's try this. So hopefully it'll look something like this. Okay. So save it. Now we go to the browser. And if I share the screen, and you guys can see, this is something that we never got to see before because it was only internal, right? But now because we made it into a string, it pretty much looks like that, and we're able to print it out to our web page. Right. So that covers that. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? So that covers JSON parse and JSON stringify. Questions?
I don't think so.
Let's see, what else can we do? Let's try something else. There is something called the eval function. This is just kind of a making a note here, but given that we have that, we have person string over here, and it is actually in that format, right? So another thing we might want to try is to create even, another person object. This will be second person object. So I'm going to say person object 2, let's say. And in this case, instead of using JSON parse, I'm going to try to use the eval function. Now, the eval function works, so sometimes you want to do like 2 + 3, and it performs that operation if all the symbols are correct, instead of giving you the string. So that's what eval is for. And so what we want to do is we want to realize this thing as an object by using eval, right? So in this case, we probably want to run, let's see, let's try just that. So let's just try person string in here. Person string. All right, and we would want to create it into an object. So really, if it works, it'll be similar to what we did here. Right, we're going to get these again, but this time they will be coming from, they should be coming from person object 2. Okay, because that's the one that we just did here. First name, last name becomes full name. We get the label message. We print it out. Let me actually just change these, Mary, so that this time around, something else. All right, so if we try this then, let's run the eval function. So notice that I'm using eval kind of as a replacement for JSON parse to try to achieve the same effect. So I'm going to save the file, go to the browser, refresh, and it did. Let me get rid of comment this one out. I'm going to comment all of this out actually. All right, and I'm just leaving the object itself and using eval to convert it to object 2, and then we call first name, last name. These are objects that we're putting together, and then we just save this. Let's see. We might need to do some tweaking, but let's see. So now I'm going to go here. Right. Now, so it's not generating. So what I'm going to try to do now is I'm going to add some parentheses in here. So I'm going to do parentheses plus. I'm going to concatenate that to the front and the end of this. All right, and I'm going to try it again. It's not working.
Wouldn't you need object 2 in the second person object in line 21?
You forgot a plus after
It is
person
funny,
string.
right? Yeah, okay, you're right.
You also forgot a plus after person string when concatenating the.
Did I? Oh, okay, all right. I hope that's okay. Yeah, good.
It worked after I did that.
It worked. Oh, okay. All right. So that's great then. Great catch. Great eye. All right. So now if I go to, yeah. Okay. There we go. Good catch. So as you can see then, now it's showing, I'm showing currently the browser. And in the browser, you can see it does say, Mary Doe, right? So I should say Jane Doe. And so now you can see that actually you can use the eval also, although I do recommend that you just follow the Json Stringify and the Json parse. I just really wanted to show you this. There's a bit of a comment. Okay, so that's bit of a comment there. Any questions, guys?
I don't think so.
Questions, right? So making sense, I think. All right, so that just leaves currently now we have 2 big problems that we have to tackle. And then, the lab. So I just want to see if there's anything else, any little examples worth. All right. Okay, so I think we're ready to try a more complex example here. All right, so let's do then. So all we have left now is two more complex examples. So I'm gonna do the cookie example later, and for now we're gonna build a JSON object that has an array. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at combining arrays, for loops, and this is some of this example would be similar to some of the things you have to do for your assignment, okay? So let's create a new file. So I'm going to save here. All right, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this JSON array. Okay. Go ahead and share this. All right, so here is, you should be seeing the notepad, so we can go ahead. The goal of this will be basically, we're going to have a class person object. You can create it however you want. I'll just keep it simple. And then the person object will have persons, right? So very much like in your homework assignment, you would have course grade made up of objects called assignments. So it would be very similar. And then after that, we're going to try to stringify it, parse it. We're also going to iterate through the persons, maybe try to print them out, etc. We're going to need for this two spans, basically. And we're going to just need one function. We're going to call it test. And that function is going to run on load. Okay, so HTML. And then body. All right, so in the head section, we're going to define script. Okay. I'm going to just define here, an object function person. Okay, it's going to take a first name, comma, last name. Oops. Comma, last name. Open curly bracket, close curly bracket. This dot first name this dot last name. All right, so you got those two in there. No methods for now. Now let's define the function. Function test. All right, and the first thing we use is we will use an array of person objects. And this we'll need an object that contains this array basically. So whereas we created the object person, we're going to call this persons. It's sort of, so somebody is asking me if this is a constructor. It is in a sense, yes, because that's why it's a little bit confusing to introduce. So don't mix the class template that we talked about with this, okay? This is a function person technically, but it's defined as an object itself. So we can build the object and it has the parameters this. So think of them as two separate things in a way, right? What we saw today about a class is it's a template of objects that was defined to be more consistent with the way you're used to programming. This in itself is just a function, but it technically works the exact same way. Because you'll see, we'll just create person, person, person by calling, you know, this object here. Okay? All right, so let's proceed then to this function here. So what I was saying is, so we will have a top level object and it'll contain a property called persons, which is going to be an array, and that array will contain objects of type person, which is this little thing here. All right, so let's do then this example. So I'm going to create person object. Okay, and person object will be equal, and there's a lot of ways of doing this, right? So we've seen several. So I'm going to just take this approach, right? So I create persons as the name, and then the value is actually an array. And it's an array, you know, in square brackets here, right, of new persons. So notice here, new persons. So in essence, it's acting exactly like a constructor. Okay, so let's say, you know, John Doe. John Doe, that's one, right? And then I can create another one. Let's say new person Mary Smith. All right, and then we can do, you know, just one more. Let's do, obviously when you do your assignments, you will have to do more than these, okay? A new person here will be Bob. Whatever, Doe. Okay, so we have another name there. So now we have the three names, right? So notice, you know, the square brackets represents a type of an array. It's kind of like a list. And then it's associated with this name. So you have a name value in here, name value. Okay, of the array, we have the object, person, object. Okay, and there's obviously several ways of doing this, but that should be a simple one. So the question now is, that should be an object. And now let's just go ahead and convert it to a string. So I'm going to do person JSON, right? Person JSON string. And then obviously we're going to parse it back again. So because this is an object itself, so this is an object. JSON dot stringify person object. Okay, so person object. And now we want to just show the object. So we're going to do something we did before, similar to this, right? So let me just create, I'm going to copy this. Copy that. So I got the body tag there, got the span. And then I can do label message get element by ID message. All right. And now you have to assign that value to the inner HTML. So I'm going to do label message dot inner HTML, and I'm going to assign this to it. First thing we want to see is that, hopefully. Hopefully I'm not missing anything here.
Quick question.
Question?
Yeah, don't you need to include document before the get element by ID? And then do you have to have var in front of LBL message since that's the first time you're using it, or?
Well, sometimes you don't, but
Okay, I was just curious.
all right, so let's go ahead and try it. All right, so I saved it. Now let's go run this. Okay, and if I share the screen, you guys see the output, right? So you should be seeing. So we created the object very similar to what you will create with course grade and then assignments. So now the question is, we know how to create it, stringify it, which basically means the next step for you, save it to a cookie, for instance, or something like that. The next step now is we're going to do the reverse of that, right? So we're going to parse it back into an object. So convert the JSON string to a JavaScript object. So we're going to try that now. So I'm going to go back to Notepad. And now we can do, you know, our person object. Let's call this actually person object like that. And we just need to call json.parse and we're going to take the string. Okay. Now we have the object itself, and we now have the ability to retrieve the array, right? So we have the ability to retrieve the array. So let's call this person's array, and we're going to retrieve it from person object dot persons. Why dot persons? Because that is the name of that name value pair in the object itself. Okay. Now, if we want to get the count of how many objects we have in there, we could try that. We can say, you know, var count equal persons dot. No, actually, it should be persons array. Yeah, I guess persons array dot length. length. Okay, and now let's go ahead and actually print that out just so that we know that this is working. But we could also do an alert, but since we have this, so let's just type count in here. There should be 3 by my count. Do an alert here. Okay, so it's not doing. Oh, I have a typo. I just noticed. So I have a.
In line 25, you have it set to persons arrays plural rather than person array singular.
Right. Right. Are you guys seeing my notepad? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Yes, you're right. So it should be array. I think that should work. All right. So I need to open that. All right. Yeah, it's working now. So you can see there, have the alert, and also on here. So I have 3. So I was able to get the count. Okay, so going back to the Notepad++. Now the question is, one of the problems that you'll have in that assignment is that you have to, kind of iterate through the grades, because you might say, well, what's a grade for assignment? Lab 3. So you have to iterate through all the labs, find lab 3, modify it, change it in some way. So the simplest thing to do here is to retrieve each person's first and last name. For this example, we're going to create a for loop. Okay. So we're going to create a for loop. I'm going to take out this alert. I don't need it. Okay. And instead, I'm going to go here. And now I'm going to add a for loop. Okay. I'm going to say, I'm going to accumulate all the full names in a string. So I'm going to do then to display, oh, sorry. All the full names in a string. Now I'm going to do for, var I equal 0, I less than count, because we just got that, and I++, so the traditional example. All right, so we have the for loop there. We know we got the object. We know we got the array. So now we need to iterate through it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to concatenate all the names. So full names will be equal to full names, which is initialized to blank. And I'm going to concatenate to it from persons, right? Because that person's array, actually, because I already have the array. So really this is just an array. This is no longer, it's an array of objects, right? But it's not an object of objects. It's an array of objects, if you want to think of it that way. So first of all, we need to get each cell in the array, right? So we get that each cell is an object. So therefore, now we can use the dot and get the parameters. So I believe they were, first name, and then concatenate a blank white space in there, and then plus, and then again, persons array with the same index dot, because now it's, same object, last name. And then the last thing you probably want to have in there is a maybe a break line tag. So we can do, let's think about what we can do. We can do some type. Yeah, let's just do a break line. Okay. Okay, this needs to be in double quotes. Okay, like that. So hopefully that'll do what we need. Okay, that will concatenate all the names. We're iterating through the array, grabbing each object, concatenating the parameters, and then now we just print it out. So really, if everything was correct, we just have to plug in full names there, and that should work. So let's try it. Hit save. Go to the website. And there you go. So you should be seeing the website, and you can see that all three names have been displayed correctly. And that's it. That's an example of that. Now we've combined objects, arrays, iterated through arrays, looked for, went over the data, and stringified, parse, etc. And that's it. This code is similar to what you will have to do for your homework assignment. Any questions?
No questions.
No questions. Pretty clear. Good. All right. So now I really just have two more examples, and then I believe you should be ready for your homework assignment. I'm going to leave I'm going to do something a little bit more similar to the grade calculator, but I will do that Thursday and then give you time to work on the assignment. So that just leaves then, we're going to get started with the cookies, right? So that's the only topic that's missing is, okay, if I have, let's say, some string, how can I load it into the cookie? If I have a cookie, how can I get the cookie, break it into the crumbs, right? All of that, all those details. So let's think about that last problem. So let's create a new text file in your folder. Call it, cookies example, for instance. Okay. You can then open it with Notepad++. We can go ahead and just copy some of this. I'm just going to copy some of it. I don't have to retype it. You can pretty much, I would recommend just get rid of all the JavaScript, because that's usually better to start from something from scratch. All right, so we have that. We have some method in there, span. All right. So now the question is dealing with cookies. The main element with dealing with a cookie is the, document.cookie, right? So that's really the main idea. So here, let's think about what we're gonna do. So we're gonna set a cookie. We're gonna get a cookie. We want to list all the crumbs in the cookie and maybe even delete a cookie, right? So this is a bit more complex now. Example. So interesting side note. I was reading an article today that this DuckDuckGo, this it's a different kind of it's web browser, web search. They have they're really investing, I think, and they're making privacy central to their business model. So, this is important because if you're being tracked by everything you do, and then you get advertisements based on everything that you do on your, Facebook and all that. So it's worth looking into this browser if you haven't done so already, because not just from the point of view of using it, but also you guys as students in IT, you're interested in both the web and security, cybersecurity. Privacy is certainly a big part of that. So I would strongly recommend that you research how it actually works. Use it, but also, so if you're using, if you use it for years, that's great. And for those of you that haven't even thought about it, certainly worth looking into to use it, but also it's an interesting research topic, because it's interesting to see how they've managed, the way that I would describe Facebook and Google, it's like an octopus, right? They've got, it's so complex what they've done, so that you can't really figure out how they're tracking you. So it might be very interesting, actually, to look at how DuckDuckGo, which I think it's also part of, it's private, but also some kind of an organization, look into how they've done things, because you'll learn a lot is what I'm saying. It'll be something interesting. When we talk about cookies traditionally, we would always think of, that's how they're storing information. But there are other ways now that they build their profiles. So certainly, I do recommend that you take a look at that. It might be an opportunity for you guys in the future, right? To be very, very clear on how it works. Anyway, that's just a comment. All right, so let's go ahead now and look at the example of the cookie. So we probably won't have enough time to finish, but let's get started with it. So the idea here is, as I said, we're going to need, first of all, our cookie is going to be empty, right? So we're going to need to set a cookie. Then we might want to get a cookie. We might want to list all cookies, and then maybe even delete a cookie. Remember, we're really talking about the crumbs in the cookie itself. So let's start there, actually. So let's start with our onload event will be list all cookies. All right, so list all cookies, that's one. That's the one that we want to run kind of whenever the page loads, right? So we just want to run that. We can leave our span there, that's fine. But we're going to need, if we're going to set cookies, first of all, we need input, so we're going to need text boxes. So let's say cookie name. And that's going to take some kind of an input. Type is text. All right. The ID is let's call this one cookie name. All right, cookie name. And then let's close that one. Let's add a break line here just to for more presentation. Then we're going to need the cookie value because cookies or crumbs in a cookie are key value pairs. So we're going to need cookie value. And again, we're going to do input type equal text. We're going to do ID. And this is going to be cookie value. All right, can add a break line as well. So now we need 4 functions for the 4 things that we did. So the most convenient way of doing this is just to have buttons. So I'm going to have input type equal button on click right, and doesn't matter the order. So one of the functions is list all cookies. All right, so we've got that one. What else? So I guess, yeah, we need to have a value for it. So just say list all cookies. All right, and then we can close it up. And then you can just copy this one basically. It's going to be 4 buttons for 4 different functions. All right. So let's do the other one, let's call this one set cookie. Set cookie. Let's change the description also to set cookie. Then the next one is going to be get cookie. All right. And we can say here get cookie here. And then finally we have delete cookie. Delete cookie. So those are our 4 functions. Okay. So now we can proceed to start working on these individual ones. So we should probably start with the simplest one. So let's actually, let's see the HTML, make sure everything looks good. Yeah, so if I share this screen, your website should look like this. So you'll be able to enter name value pairs here, and then you'll press the individual buttons right, to achieve your objectives. So let's go ahead and go back to the notepad. All right, so let's create one function. Now, what's the easiest one, do you think, of all, or what's the first one that we should do? What do you guys think? What's the first function we should define?
I'd say get cookie would probably be the easiest to do.
Get cookie. Well, actually, that one's tough because we have to get things, kind of iterate through something. And also we don't have any cookies to get, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so get cookie is find out of all the crumbs, it really should be get crumbs. Out of all the crumbs, this particular one. You see that? And so that one will be a little bit tougher, but I think the easiest one, good guess though, the easiest one is probably set cookie, so that we can start populating. Remember that what we discussed in the lecture a few days ago is that a cookie is really like a string, right? Made up of name, value, pairs, right? And then you have another name, value, and that's really another crumb in the cookie. So I will interchangeably be referring to crumbs and cookies as sort of the same thing. And then there's one central cookie, one single string that you reach through the document.cookie in the DOM object. So let's do that then. I think, let's do that function first. Let's try that one out. So I'm going to do function set cookie. Right. And then like that. So I have function set cookie. What I need, the first part is really easy. I just need to take the values from the text boxes, right? And I store them in some variable. And then I'm going to concatenate them. And that should be it. And then save them into the cookie object. So the central thing here is to call document.cookie and store something in it, right? So that will be the central thing. The thing that we store is actually what's in the text boxes. So we can do here a couple of variables, cookie name, document get element ID. The ID here will be cookie name. All right, and then from that, because this is a text box, right? We got the text box control or object, so now we need to grab its value parameter. All right, we repeat the same process. I can just copy this here. This one will be cookie value and document get element by ID, cookie value, and then we just get value. So that will give us what we need. And then here now, we just need to concatenate these two and assign them to the cookie object. So let's try that. So I'm going to do cookie name plus for concatenation. And here we do need to add, so we're going to do cookie value, but at the end we need to add the semicolon. Remember that the semicolon separates the crumbs in the cookie, basically. So that's the separator. And actually it's not a, I was thinking of what we were doing before. This needs to have an equal here to be completely correct. So that will need an equal sign. So we're going to have then cookie equal cookie value, semicolon. All right, and that basically would do it. However, just to kind of test it out, we can always do an alert that is going to print out document.cookie. All right, so let's just see what's in there. All right, so now I think we should be ready to try it, to test this with the set cookie function. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to save this. Now I'm going to refresh my page. I'm going to share that. All right, so let's say, some key 1122, and the value would be 42. All right, so if I do set cookie, that didn't work. All right, let's go back to Notepad then.
By line 26, or no, 27, you have the C capitalized.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. Let's try it again then. Cookie value. All right, let's try it. See if that helps. Go back to the browser. Refresh. There you go. That works. Thank you. You guys should be seeing hopefully the alert. And if you see on the alert, we're reading directly from the cookie itself, right? So it's not like we were reading a string or something. We were reading. So technically speaking, this has written to the cookie in the document. All right, so I think that's a good stopping point for today. So we kind of got through the first set cookie. So I'm going to save this to make sure I have it on Thursday. On Thursday, we will pick up basically here, finish up this problem. Then after that, I'll talk a little bit more, maybe provide a few more hints related to the homework, right? And then after that, we'll just leave it open for questions if you guys have any questions about the assignment. All right, so that's basically it for today. And I will see you guys on Thursday. We will continue this problem on Thursday, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day. All right, so if you're sending me messages about homeworks that you submitted via email, just, as I said, I don't usually accept homework assignments via email unless you have some special situations. So I'll take a look at that. Remember, if you submit anything via email also, it'll take me a while to grade, right? And I do that intentionally to discourage email, because if I start allowing a lot of email messages, students just assume, oh no, he'll accept it via email. And then they kind of put less emphasis to submitting on time, right? So during special cases, I do accept homework assignments, especially in the beginning, especially if you're new students, but just keep in mind, please, try to avoid sending me assignments via email and instead just submitting them, on time through Brightspace. But again, so far, if you've sent emails to me, I'm looking at them. Just again, I do want to discourage email submissions. All right, guys? All right, so have a good hold on, let me just pause the recording.